that you are here. Wow, that was like a mass seating. It was really quite fun to watch. We are glad that you're here this morning, and glad to get to worship with you this morning. I do want to point out this morning, instead of Cecilia's Cafe, we have the GAs doing muffins for missions. So if you would, please, as you take your muffins this morning, leave something for them in there. You have something out there for... There's a bucket out there. If you would place some money in there that they will be using for what mission project? Annie Armstrong. So, if you will, help them out with that this morning as you enjoy your muffins. Couple other words of announcement. Our regular weekly announcements, as they all fly from my head. Okay, let's start over here at the table over here. On this table, towards the door, you will find a treasure box. See, the pirate has announced our treasure box. If you choose to worship by giving this morning, we invite you to place your offerings this morning in that treasure box. On that same table, you will find some promotional materials about this service. We invite you to take those and place them wherever you think they might be relevant and needed. There are also some sign-up sheets. We would love for you to give us your information so that we can keep you updated by social networking and other means. So we invite you to fill those out as well. If you are a first-time guest, or perhaps you're not a first-time guest, you've been here once or twice, but you've never actually taken a visitor's packet, I invite you this morning to grab one of those visitor's packets. You will notice that they look like a mug with some information. And a tasty drink. And so we invite you to take one of those this morning so you can find out a little bit more about who we are here at College Park. And we are glad to have our visitors and hope that you have been made to feel welcome this morning. If you have been coming and you are not yet involved in a small group of Sunday school, come talk to one of us afterwards. We will find a place where you might feel at home, and we would love to have you be able to dig a little deeper with us in the Word. Book club book for this month is Brooms by James Rubart and Jeff.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Do y'all think we have a much cooler pirate than Johnny Depp? Did you hear him? Yeah, I think he's a much cooler. Yes, he's got a better beard than Johnny Depp ever did. All right, couple announcements. That was good. All right, couple things. Number one, in the next few weeks, our church is going to be discussing some construction projects and how to finance them. Our facility update committee and our finance committee have been working, and they have some information they want to present to the church. And what we'll be doing for the next several weeks on Sunday mornings at 10:15, we will be in here, except for today at 10:15, we will be down in Adult 4. Every other Sunday we'll be in here at 10:15, and we'll have a presentation from both of those committees to tell you what's going on with the gym and with the other projects that we're looking to do. So that's happening every Sunday at 10:15, and then on Wednesday nights during the Bible study time that happens here in Smith Hall, we'll do that same presentation. There'll be time for question and answers. So I want you to know that. We sent that letter out and want you to know those information sessions are starting this morning in Adult 4, and you're welcome to come or in here Sundays at 10:15 or Wednesdays at 6:45. Also, next Saturday is a huge day. For our youth ministry, for our church. We're raising it's our last fundraiser before we leave for Jamaica. We're doing the yard sale in the morning on March the 10th from 7 to 11, followed by the ACC tournament. We'll be watching the games and selling wings, hot dogs, and those kinds of things, watching the game, and then auctioning off a variety of items from our youth, from our community, and we want you to come and be a part of that. And we appreciate the support that our church continues to give our youth. Thank you.
This Sunday is the second Sunday of Lent. And Lent is the season that starts with Ash Wednesday. It's 40 days going up until Holy Week. It is the time leading into the cross. And it is the time of year, and sometimes it bothers me that we have to actually set aside a time to do this, but it is the time of the church year in which we really investigate who we are and who Christ has called us to be. And looking towards the cross, we realize that if we were not the sinful creatures that we are, there would have been no need for the cross. And so everything that Christ suffered was for us and because of our sinfulness. Often during Lent, we talk about denying ourselves. We give something up for Lent. Some people give up social media. Some people give up coffee or chocolate or lots of times it's food. I've noticed that. But we tend to, or we encourage each other sometimes to give something up for Lent. And sometimes the talk is, what are you giving up for Lent? And, I just thinking in terms of why we give something up. We think about Jesus in the desert for 40 days fasting as he prepared for his ministry. So sometimes we deny ourselves because we're preparing ourselves. Other people pick up good habits. They decide for 40 days they're going to encourage somebody, or they're going to do something that they should have been doing that they're not doing. But in thinking this morning about denying ourselves, thinking about giving up something for Lent and why we would do that, I was kind of struck with the fact that as Christ prepared to head towards the cross, and when he came to earth, even as a child, he willingly gave up his kingship. He gave up his deity. He gave up his place in heaven to come and walk on earth with man, so that we might be with him forever. So that we would know that we are never, ever alone, and that for eternity we can be with him and be with the Father.
It's easy on the good days, but Father, on the bad days, to remember that you are with us no matter what, and that you walk with us, and that you carry us when we can't walk anymore. Amen. Won't you stand with us as we continue to worship this morning? Just
Transfiguration. You remember that? Okay, we're talking about how Jesus was changed and how Peter spoke up and wanted to build a monument up there. Do you remember that whole story? And during that sermon, I made reference to the fact that it was an interesting sandwich because just prior to the Transfiguration, Jesus had predicted his death, and following the Transfiguration, they left to go to Jerusalem, basically going the path, the journey to the cross. And as the Revised Common Lectionary goes, it's a little confusing because we had the Transfiguration a couple weeks ago. Now we back up and we hit the passage about Jesus predicting his death. I'm sorry, I don't figure all that out. I let them do that. But that's our text for this morning. It's the passage where Jesus is predicting his death, and he gives us some pretty specific instructions in regard to that. I want to read that for you. It is from Mark chapter 8, beginning in verse 31. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly. He always did. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. I'd have liked to have been a fly on the wall for that. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world yet forfeit his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." The cross is not and cannot be loved. With those opening words of the book, The Crucified God, Jürgen Moltmann begins what many believe to be perhaps one of the most important books on the meaning of the crucified Christ. You know, from the very beginning of his book, he dispels any notion of the cross that romanticize or sanitize its reality. The cross is the means, understand, the cross is the means by which human beings crucified the Son of God. The cross is the instrument by which suffering and death were inflicted on the innocent servant of God. The cross is first and foremost not a piece of jewelry, not an attractive wall hanging. It is the scandal of how we treated God's Son, God incarnate. It was a scandal, but it was not a surprise, however. Immediately after Peter's confession of Jesus as the Christ, as the Messiah of God, the first order of business for Jesus was to make clear what that confession meant. Okay, you've confessed me as the Messiah. Now, let's talk about what that really means. You know, Christ was not to be the conquering hero. He was not to be the triumphant warrior that so many, if not most or all, had come to expect. In the words of Jesus, he said, "The Son of Man must suffer many things, be rejected by the elders, the priests, and the scribes, and be killed. And 3 days later, rise." Peter's abrupt rebuke of Jesus probably just barely kind of scratched the surface of what would be popular discontent with Jesus' goals and ambition. Years of all these expectations unraveled as Jesus' words flow out. He's talking about suffering. He's talking about rejection, and he's talking about death. You know, the fate of the Christ, that kind of fate was unheard of, and Peter he protested. He could not fathom what Jesus was saying, and he completely rejected that idea. If you'd been there, would you have gone along with Peter on that? See, it may be those protests were lodged not just against the image of Messiah that Jesus taught, Jesus addresses that. You know, even as Jesus introduced what it meant for him to be the expected Messiah, he drew out the implications for the community that confessed to identify with him as their Lord. He said, you know, there were those there that would save their life by losing it. That they were there for those who were gaining the whole world. It would be no profit if they lost their soul in the process of it. In even more explicit terms, Jesus addressed those who would be Christ-like, who would be Christians, who would say they wanted to follow after him. He said in verse 34, here's what you got to do. You got to deny yourself, then what? Take up your cross, follow me. Deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me. We're going to look at those three things individually. The denial of self. The denial of self, I believe, has been misinterpreted in the history of the church, ranging anywhere from just mental put-downs of your own self-worth to acts maybe of physical punishment, to self-hatred. There was actually some pretty wild extremes, too. There was this really strange cult called the Circumcellions. Anybody ever heard of the Circumcellions? These cats. Here's what they do. They would take sticks or clubs, because, you know, Jesus told Peter to put down the sword. So they took sticks and clubs, and then they would attack travelers on the highway. They'd go out there and start beating them with sticks and clubs, hoping that the travelers would kill them in self-defense. And you go, why in the world would they do that? They believed that martyrdom was the ultimate goal. Now, never mind that whole turn the cheek business. They're going out and attacking people so that people will kill them so that they can go to be with Jesus in heaven as a martyr. You know, very, very, very bizarre stuff. And if that didn't work, if the people would not kill them in response, then they'd all join together and go jump off a cliff and kill themselves. I'm not kidding. You can't make this stuff up. You cannot make this stuff. This is what these cats did. And an interesting aside to that, they were not the only ones that were kind of suicidal in their cult thing. And it was these type of cults that led the Christian church in 364 AD to decree that suicide was a sin. That's what led the church. None of this stuff happens in a vacuum. All right? What does it mean to deny self? You know, a more valuable understanding of self-denial intended, I think, by Jesus, comes by the self-denial practiced by Jesus. In Philippians 2, it gives us a good picture. It says, setting aside your own prerogatives and privileges for the sake of others. Nowhere does the gospel portray Jesus in a self-punishing, self-hating manner. Frequently, though, is Jesus portrayed as the Lord who freely and graciously comes as a servant, to serve others, to give of himself. Denial, then, is neither self-hatred, nor is it picking and choosing of things to give up that in the long run matter little, if anything, to our spiritual growth. For us to deny ourselves in the example of Christ is to set aside preoccupation with what we deserve from others and instead focus on what we can offer to others. Let me give you a modern history example. Albert Schweitzer. Are you familiar with that name? Albert Schweitzer. It was kind of providential a couple of weeks ago. I was having a conversation with Charles Evans, our pastor emeritus, or as he says, emeritus. So they have an analytic that'll fix that. I was having a conversation with him. We were talking about several things, and Albert Schweitzer came up. And we were talking about several things with that. You may be aware of Schweitzer's medical mission work in Africa, and that was kind of the second half of his adult life. You know, the mountains in North Carolina actually have a link to Albert Schweitzer, interestingly enough, due to the work of a Dr. Gain Cannon, who was deeply influenced by the work of Schweitzer, as well as the example of his father, Doc Cannon, as they knew him in the mountains. And Gain Cannon established a hospital up in the Balsam Grove community, which is about 25 miles from Bavard. Some of you are nodding your head, you know where it is. Not far from the Rosman tracking station. That goes way back, okay? But there's a hospital up there that was named after Schweitzer with And such a position would have given him a life of comfort and prestige, very prosperous. He could have been. Did you know that he was also one of the 20th century leading theologians? Did you know that? His book on the life of Jesus is still considered one of the premier studies in the life of Christ. So if you think about that, he could have been the head of any divinity school, any seminary, which would have been quite a position of prestige and would have been led to quite a prosperous life in a material sense. Yet where did he choose to spend his life? In Africa, in some small mission area in a remote region of Africa where none of the patients there knew of his prowess on the keyboard, nor did they know that he was one of the leading theological minds in the world. All that they knew was that he gave to them. He was a doctor. He was a healer. He devoted his life to a ministry of compassion. That's what they knew of Albert Schweitzer. And the point of Schweitzer's life is not that we all go buy one-way tickets to remote areas to minister to people, although the world is severely lacking in people who are willing to do that. I think the bigger point is, the bigger lesson comes in learning the life, learning the gift of setting ourselves out of the limelight in order to participate in just the sheer grace of service. That's his example. That's his legacy. When we learn, goodness is its own reward. When we discover we don't need to be preoccupied with self in order to find joy for self, then Schweitzer's legacy and Jesus' invitation to self-denial becomes our experience. That's what self-denial is about. Jesus said, you want to follow me, you've got to deny yourself. Second of all, you have to take up your cross. Good. It's a little slow on the tape, but that's all right. Yeah, eventually it'll come up on the screen. Take up your cross. Taking up your cross speaks of the will that we exercise when deciding to risk the Christian life. Now, in Jesus' time, understand the nature of this. In Jesus' time, the Romans required condemned criminals to carry their own cross to the place of execution. You know, it was considered the final indignity. It'd be kind of like if you were being electrocuted by an electric chair, them telling you got to plug in the chair. Or if you were being killed by lethal injection, you had to prepare the syringes to do that. I mean, it was punishment in and of itself. You know, taking up the cross was not their decision. It was ultimately their sentence. And in contrast to that, you have Jesus who comes up and says, hey, by the way, take up your cross if you want to be a disciple. Not by coercion, but by choice. Just as denying yourself is something that you choose to do, so must bearing your own Christian cross be something that you choose to do. Willing acceptance of the example and the path that Jesus has for us. So the cross is both a sign of the path as well as its content. If you'll allow me to kind of bully pulpit a minute. One of my biggest concerns with 21st century church is that we have confused discipleship with anything but a cross. You know, instead of promising the way of the cross, too many invitations to faith are kind of filled with these feel-good promises of prosperity and immediate good health and all that, and it makes me cringe, and it kind of makes me nauseated at times. Because in stark contrast, Jesus' invitation to take up your cross is an act of incredible, radical trust, whereby we acknowledge the path that may turn out to be just like Jesus's, with everything that's involved. And there are crosses to be borne as you keep the faith daily. Think about it in your average life. Think about some things that you encounter, and these are of small magnitude compared to what Jesus experienced. But think about it. Relating in a mature way with others who are constantly patronizing or belittling those around them, that could be a cross-shaped journey of faith, can't it? Forgiving those who are unforgivable. Forgiving those who constantly hold grudges. Who deny forgiveness to others. That could be a cross-shaped dilemma of our faith. Being gracious in our acceptance of those who are and we're faced with decisions. And as we're faced with daily decisions, we can choose to do one of two things. It really comes down to this. Either we're going to follow Christ and his example, or we're going to serve ourselves. Every decision really comes down to one of those two choices. That's what the crossroads really means. By the power of the cross, either we're going to choose to follow Jesus and his example in every decision that we make, or we're going to decide we're going to serve self. We're going to do what we want to do. I looked through and I read through, and as you know, from this passage we go directly into transfiguration and all that. Mark really gives us no clues as to how all of this sifted out. These words are pretty strong, and there's no clues there as to really what happened. Obviously, or evidently, Peter raged no further protest. No misunderstandings were expressed at the time by other disciples or the crowd that Jesus had called in to be with the disciples for this teaching. Evidently, they kind of took it and thought about it. That the silence, in a way, whispers to us to enter into that crowd, to make ourselves part of that crowd and wonder with them, what would we do? Without the comforting circles of friends and fellowship, without the generations of all of our families who have been part of the church, with only Jesus' words as he said, if you want to be my followers, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. If we heard that for the first time, what would we have done? Maybe the bigger question is, what will we do? See, we have the benefit of hindsight. We do have the tradition. We do have what our parents taught us. We do have God's word to reveal himself to us. We have all of that, but yet others, many will still reject. Others will ignore these words of Jesus. Or they'll explain away, no, he didn't really mean that literally. Sorry, I don't see another way to read it. What will you do with this command to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow him? See, by virtue of the fact that you're here this morning, you are at a crossroad. And you will decide either to follow him or serve yourself. Let's pray and ask for his help. Dear Father, we understand it really is that cut and dry. Either we're going to serve ourselves or we're going to serve you. We ask for your strength. We ask for your presence in our lives, that we would learn to recognize. We would learn to acknowledge. We would learn to follow. We would learn to have joy, peace in that journey. God, you didn't promise it would be all roses and easy times. But you did promise you'd be with us, and that's enough. Help us to understand it truly is enough. The joy of the Lord is our strength. The joy of the Lord is our strength. God, help us to lean on you, even as we seek to follow the example of your Son, Jesus Christ. And it's in his name that we pray.
He asked me to take up my cross. Scratch that, you insist. I must deny myself. How do I deny that which I love best? I mean, I have to look out for number one, right? Get behind me, Satan. Deny myself. Well, I might give up something for Lent. I'd do anything for 40 days. Deny myself. And take up my cross. Does that mean there's a cross especially for me? I thought this was all about your cross. I thought it was supposed to be about joy and peace and grace and mercy. Cross means pain and sacrifice. The cross means persecution, maybe even death. Take up my cross and follow you. Where are we going, Lord? Can I have a little hint, please? I have these plans. So many plans. No, I don't want the whole world. Just what I deserve. What I deserve. You took that for me. And you insist again, deny myself, take up my cross, and follow.
Looks like tonight the sky is heavy. Feels like the winds are gonna change. Beneath my feet, the earth is ready. I know it's time for heaven's rain. It's gonna upon this barren land, open my hands, yeah. 'Cause it's living water we desire to flood our hearts with holy fire. Rain down all around the world, we're singing. Rain
selfish desires and wants. Help us to turn around, to come back home. Open the heavens, Father. Fill us with a spirit of service. Fill us with courage to take up our cross, to follow you, to be filled with the love that you showed us. Father, as we heard in the poem, what we deserve is not even close to what we deserve death. We deserve worse than that. And Father, you have taken that and borne it upon the cross in your shed blood, your broken body. Father, we ask that we would be willing to be broken for you, spiritually broken, that we would give ourselves up